Good afternoon. This is Matthew Roselle. I'm Hudson Falls High School #1 history teacher. And we're here on Memorial Day weekend, and we are here to celebrate the sacrifices made by the generations of Americans that have passed and the generation of Americans that are here with us today. This is the World War II Living History Project, and today our theme is the Pacific War, the combat Marines, and the things that these gentlemen went through in World War II, fighting the Japanese. That's the theme of our show. I'm going to introduce my guests. I'm going to give you a little background about the project and what we do, and then we'll be hearing from each one of these gentlemen today. Starting over on my left-hand side, I have Mr. Robert Addison. Bob, will you give a wave of the hand?
Red one. Red one.
I have Mr. Art Laporte from Hudson Falls, Mr. Dan Lawler from Hudson Falls, Mr. Walt Hammer from Glens Falls, and Mr. James Butterfield, who's also from Glens Falls. And Jimmy Butterfield, as you can probably guess, was wounded terribly about 57 years ago during the island battle for Okinawa. James Butterfield can't see today, and he hasn't been able to see since that terrible battle in 1945, which he'll probably tell us a little bit about today. And all these men, be it physical or be it mental, suffered a lot so that you and I could enjoy the freedom that we have today. And of course, it's Memorial Day weekend, and that's the purpose for our webcast. Okay, can I get the lights again, Adam? All right. If you can see the screen, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. And this is a World War II Living History Project, and I'm doing this for two purposes. Number one, I want you to be aware of it. And number two, I want the gentlemen up here to be aware of what their stories are going to be preserved for future generations. This is our live webcast, and if you're on the website, you obviously have seen this page because you click on the hyperlink, and this web broadcast is going out to all over the country, actually, right as we speak. So here's the page, and if you scroll down a little bit further, I'll show you who it's dedicated to. Randy Holmes is one of them. Randy Holmes was a 17-year-old from Hudson Falls, New York, who in November of 1941, actually before that, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy, and on December 7th, 1941, he was killed. And this is a page from his senior yearbook. He would have been in the class in 1942, but he left high school 6 months earlier to join the Navy. And he was killed at Pearl Harbor, and he's one of the first casualties of World War II, and he's right from our own community. So this page is dedicated to him, and this, of course, is from the Hermes yearbook of 1942. The seniors graduated without him that year. Raise your hand if you're 17 years old in this room. Or older. Okay, we've got a few. Okay, hit the back button for me. Back. And Clarence from McGuire. This is Clarence's headstone. If you go to the cemetery, St. Mary's Cemetery in Fort Edward, you can see it. It reads in the inscription, Sergeant Clarence B. McGuire, a courageous and gallant gunner who gave all for God and country, July 29, 1944. May his soul and all the souls of the gallant men who died rest in peace. Back button. Click on Clarence again. Scroll down. Thumbnail. Clarence. This is a picture that I found in my own house. I've never met him, but I am related to Clarence. He's the tall guy in the center who was a navigator on a B-17 that was shot down over Germany on July 29, 1944. 2 Memorial Days ago, I found an American flag, a little one. Go back to the gravestone. Walking down the street, there it is. And I walked down to the cemetery, and I put it there, and I took this picture. So I'm not sure I was supposed to find it in the dirt, but that's where it was. And I brought it down here and dressed up Clarence's grave a little bit. And that's what Memorial Day is all about. And that's what I'm trying to bring home to you this weekend. These 5 gentlemen who are here with us today, we might have a few more showing up, are going to tell us their stories. And of course, they'll tell you that they're the lucky ones because they did come home. And they're here today to tell you about what happened. Okay, bring it down. Or, yeah. Yes, right here. Okay, today we're going to talk about the combat Marines. And the first thing we will probably talk about in a chronological fashion is going to be the Battle for Guadalcanal, which was the first time that U.S. forces engaged the Japanese in the Pacific on land. In 1942, in fact, the 60th anniversary of this horrific battle is coming up this August, right, Bob? Yeah. So we're going to take you through this little slideshow, just to give you a little quick background, and then I'll probably have Mr. Addison speak, and we'll go from there. Okay, little chronological historical context. It says, by the late 1930s, the Japanese Empire had extended its control throughout Southeast Asia and was looking for more resources to fuel its ambition of dominating this part of the world. And we see a map over on the far left-hand side. You can see where Pearl Harbor is. And of course, that's going to come up. But you can see the extent of Japanese control during World War II in the Pacific and all the islands. This is basically an island hopping campaign that these gentlemen were involved in to get to the Japanese mainland. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had plunged the United States into a war that was inevitable. This is the USS Arizona. The United States declared war on December 8th. Same day, the Japanese struck bases, U.S. bases, in the Philippines, Wake Island, and Guam with devastating effect. They're on this map here. And also began attacks on Thailand, Malaysia, and Hong Kong on the same day. 2 days later, on the 9th, the Japanese invaded the Gilbert Islands, and there's the Gilberts over there. The United States was up against a formidable adversary, the Japanese Imperial Army and Navy. Within 6 months in the Philippines had fallen. Of course, this is a U.S. possession at the time. During the Bataan Death March, 76,000 exhausted Americans and Filipinos were forced to march 65 miles to their prison camps. Many stragglers were clubbed, shot, stabbed, or bayoneted. Many were sick. In June 42, the Japanese sent a strike force of over 150 vessels to attack the United States base at the Midway Islands. The plan was to lure the remnants of the U.S. fleet that wasn't destroyed at Pearl and annihilate it once and for all. But it wasn't going to be that way because our Navy cryptologists had broken the operational code of the Imperial Japanese fleet, and the Japanese fell into this trap. Admiral Yamamoto's fleet limped back to Japan short 4 carriers, 322 planes they lost, and over 3,500 men. And the photograph on the inside is of a torpedo bomber pilot striking one of the 4 Japanese carriers. So it was quite an upset. It was a turning point in the Pacific, but remember, we had committed no ground troops yet against the Japanese. But the American retreat was over. Now much of the fighting would be done by crack divisions of combat Marines, and the early conquests of the Japanese would be rolled back slowly, one by one. The first U.S. targets were the Japanese-held Solomon Islands. From here, enemy bombers at Guadalcanal would be able to strike American positions. Guadalcanal had to be taken, and both sides, Japanese and American, knew it. And Guadalcanal is down in that neighborhood. I'd move over to the screen, but my foot is injured. Next slide. On August 7, 1942, the attack began. Guadalcanal and its airstrip, Henderson Field, which you can see in the background, would not be secured until February 9, 1943, 6 months later. 1,769 Americans fell to enemy fire. Over 25,600 Japanese were killed, and those were Marines and Navy personnel. Special Mobile Marine Combat Units, the 1st Raider Battalion, helped to turn the tide at Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands. 24 men in this Raider Battalion, Edson's Raiders, fought with such valor that they actually had U.S. Navy ships named for them, and many of them received the U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor. And Bob Addison was a member of this elite crew, Edson's Raiders. the Battle of Bloody Ridge, which I think he's going to tell you a little bit about. The 1st Marine Division took the Japanese garrison by surprise, overrunning Henderson Field, the island's landing strip. Outnumbered by at least 3-1, the Marines withstood a series of determined assaults on a ridge just 1 mile from the field. After battle reinforcements arrived, the process of slugging it out for the rest of the island began. And this is a map, and I'll let Bob tell you a little bit about this. Go forward. All right, go back to that map. Bob, would you like to say anything about what we're doing here? Guadalcanal. Actually, tell them what day your birthday is first, Bob. Adam, get the lights.
December 7th. It's my 19th birthday. 1 month later, I was in the Marine Corps. 7 months after that, we landed on Tulagi, Guadalcanal. Now, the 1st Marine Division had gone to Australia, and they were not prepared to go into combat. We were attached to them, but our fellows had been training in Samoa for a couple of months, so they were in pretty good shape. Now, across Sea Lark Channel from Guadalcanal was little island Tulagi, and that's where the governor of the British Solomon Islands lived. And that's where the Japanese came and set up their headquarters. They had Imperial Marines there. Japanese are Imperial Marines. I usually think of the Japanese as little people, but these guys were 6-footers. These were big boys. And they had no idea we were coming. In fact, we landed and we took the island Tulagi. It took us several days. And in the meantime, of course, we have the distinction of being the first offensive ground troops to engage the Japanese in World War II, because we landed at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the rest of the division landed at Guadalcanal at 9 o'clock. But when they landed over there, they had very little trouble taking the airstrip because there were very few fighting men over there. The Japanese had a bunch of Korean workers working on the airstrip, and so they took the airstrip without any problem. And they just built that little defense around. That's all of Guadalcanal that we had for about 6 months. The Japanese could land any place they wanted, and they did. Well, after we had secured Tulagi, there had been one battle on the Tenaroo River down here you see on the right. The Japanese tried to retake the airstrip with 1,000 men. Well, the Marines just sucked them into a trap and annihilated them. And then later on, we came over on the to Guadalcanal, and there was a gap in the perimeter defense where it says Bloody Ridge right there. There's a gap there, and our commander, Colonel Edson, talked them into us defending that part of it. Well, they knew that the Japs had been landing down at Tasimboko, which was about 40 miles down the beach to the right here, and so we went down to pull a raid down there, and it was a good thing we did, because the majority of the body of the Japs had pulled off and gone back into the jungles and to attack. And but they had 4 pieces of artillery. We destroyed them, pulled them out in the ocean, blew up an ammunition dump, destroyed a lot of food. We couldn't bring it back because 2 days after we landed on August 9th, there was a huge sea battle there, and we lost 4 cruisers, and so the rest of the fleet just took off and left us. They took all our supplies and everything with them. So we were there. The only ones that stayed behind were the APDs, World War I tin cans, destroyers that were assigned our battalion. And they were what took us across from Guadalcanal, from Tulagi over to Guadalcanal. And when we disembarked from, it was called the Calhoun, the one that I was on, and before we could hit the beach on Guadalcanal, there was an air raid, and the ship went down in 2 minutes. So that was kind of a close call. And so after we came back from Tasimboko, we got in around the ridge there, and because our CO had studied, he'd seen the Japs in. Now let me point one thing out. Nowadays, you know, I talk about the Japanese people, but when I talk about who we fought, they were Japs. Okay, and anyway, he'd observed them in China and all this stuff, so he knew how they thought. And so we put our defense was on that, it was called the Lunga Ridge, because of the Lunga River, and then later as Edson's Ridge, but we all consider it Bloody Ridge, because they attacked us, 3,500 of them attacked 700 of us, And for 2 or 3 days, they just kept going and coming and coming and coming. And when they finally left the bridge, they left 1,400 of their men behind who didn't fight anymore. And so if they had gotten through, they would have had the airstrip, and the war would have lasted an awful lot longer. So we have credit with saving Guadalcanal, and then of course Guadalcanal was a whole turning point in going north. Anything else you want to say?
Was it Colonel Edson?
Colonel Edson was at the time, yes.
And what was he like as a leader of this battalion?
Well, he was a fellow, you just had to lead. When we were training, like in Quantico, we'd go out on a Saturday morning, we'd go on a full pack, 22-mile hike, in the morning, get back for lunch. And throughout the hike, he would stop and watch every man go by. And then he would get on the old walkie-talkie and say, hold up. So he'd hold up, he'd double time up the front, take off again. When we came in, he stood there and he watched every man come in and had a comment to make to every guy, every one of us, what a good job we were doing, nice job. And that type of a guy, you just got to lead, you just have to follow. He was, and the Battle of Bloody Ridge, I was within earshot of him all night long. I could hear him talking with the forward observer of the artillery. And of course he had his skull creased a couple of times. He had some bullet holes through his dungarees and all this stuff. He wasn't one of those that, stay back here and you go do that. He was up the front and leading you, which all of our officers did. They led us. And which you have a lot of respect for.
And that's what you needed to survive it.
Right, and from day one we were told, you are the best of the best. And so you get to believe it. And his philosophy was, well, show us something that can't be done and we'll do it. Like on New Georgia, we spent 4 days in swamps and jungles coming in behind the Japanese, which they never thought we would do. And attacked them at Enagai in New Georgia.
So you came in behind them through the swamps?
Through the swamps. Yeah.
What was that like? 4 days?
Yeah, 4 days. And we were wet all the time.
You were wet?
And muddy. And we had camouflage dungarees, but you couldn't see the camouflage because there was so much mud all over us.
And so you think your training probably helped you get through a lot?
Oh yes, somebody said, well, what made your battalion outstanding? Well, they say was training and leadership. And then I take it one step further and I say the leadership they developed in us too, because after the war, many, many of our people became leaders. I can be an example. I retired as a full professor up at the college, so things like that. Heads of big companies and worked with the CIA and all this kind of stuff. And
I think you were telling me before, 2,600 men went through the Raider Battalion?
Yes, our complement was a little less than 900. We were in existence 2 years, but in the 2 years, 2,600 fellows went through the battalion.
Why is that?
Well, we had to replace people now and then. And from the original 900, after Tulagi, Guadalcanal, New Georgia, Jerry Weston, Jerry's a fellow who lives around here, he and I were of the 200 that were left of the original 900. Well, neither one of us got wounded at any time.
Very lucky.
Right.
What was your job?
I was a 60 millimeter mortar man. I was an assistant gunner on Guadalcanal, and then by New Georgia, I took a squad. I was a squad leader. So as a PFC.
Your job was to use the mortar, I guess.
Yes, and we used it on the ridge because just ahead of us, about 150 yards, we were behind one knoll, they were behind a knoll, and somebody said, hey, can you get 150 yards on that pea shooter? We said, sure can. So he held up his Rising gun, and we sighted in. He said, okay, go 10 mils right, 10 mils right. And that was the end of that. And then there was a clearing, and then they were down in the jungles down there. They were firing at us with knee mortars and machine guns and snipers, and so we just pattern fire. We probably expended about 100 rounds and just cleared the whole place out. And that was another one of my close calls. One time I looked up and one of those things came right at me, right beside me, rolled down the hill, never went off.
Very lucky.
Somebody else had some more plans for me, I guess.
I guess so. And you're a phys ed teacher at ACC, right?
Yes, I started all the phys ed intramurals athletics up at ACC back in 1962, and I retired in 1990 as full professor.
Well, we really appreciate you being here today. Can we have a hand for Bob?
Director of the state police.
Yes, after he retired from the Marine Corps, he reorganized the whole state police over in Vermont. Yeah. And he was one of 7 people in our battalion that became generals. And he was one of 4 in the battalion that got the Congressional Medal of Honor.
That was Mazzalone was one of them, right?
No, he wasn't in our battalion. No.
Well, these Marines are here today. They're telling us their story. They saw a lot. And Bob just spoke a little bit. I think we have 10 minutes before we break for next class, right? Okay, let's bring up one more PowerPoint here. Lights?
If I could say, this table over here is full of stuff that from our 1 battalion. People want to look at that.
Yeah, in about 5 minutes, we're going to roll through one more PowerPoint. And after that, we want students to come up here. So we'll have a good 5 minutes before the bell rings so that you can see, you can meet our vets, number 1. You can say thanks, and you can see some of the artifacts that they brought in with them. See several Japanese flags here. Who wants to tell me about the Japanese flags that are on the table? Or just tell me about the flags, your souvenirs that are on the table.
Now, where'd you get yours, Dan?
Okinawa.
Dan got his in Okinawa, which are these 2 here. And now, a lot of you have seen the flags with the stripes.
The rising sun?
That's the Navy, yeah. But the land forces use just these sun type here. This one here, the 4th day, that's when they raised the flag on Mount Suribachi. I was on the cliff to the right across the beachhead, and I was going back to get some food for my outfit. I saw a bandana around a Jap's head. I didn't kill him, the artillery had killed him, and or the Navy. And so I yanked it off his head, which was a very foolish move because it might have had a string attached to it with a booby trap, but I didn't get blowed up, so I got the flag. And if you come up and see it, you'll see the holes where the shrapnel had got him, and of course it was around his head, so it killed him. Anything else?
And those other flags are, Dan's going to say something about.
Yes, the Japanese had these flags folded up in a different way we had. And they wore them around their necks. I don't know why. The one furthest one here, it's got bloodstains on it, which wouldn't come out. I took these off of the Japs. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you get that back there? Is there anything else, Bob?
Now, I'll roll through the next PowerPoint, and then we'll have these students come up and meet you, okay?
Yes, right.
All right, in Flanders Fields. Okay, I noticed is when Walt, raise your hand. Walt came in the door. He's got something on his hat. What do you have on your hat there?
A poppy.
He's got a poppy.
Yeah. Distributed by the American Legion.
And I got a quick PowerPoint here because the poppies were being sold. They're being sold right now. They're only like $1 or whatever donation.
$1, $2. I've seen $5 handed to people.
Well, let's see what the poppy's all about here. I got a little presentation on it.
I believe these started in World War I.
Yep.
Okay.
That's where this poem comes from. So I'll read it. It says, in Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard among the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. In Flanders fields remains to this day one of the most memorable war poems ever written. It is a lasting legacy of the terrible Battle of Ypres in the spring of 1915 during World War I. One of the most asked questions is, why poppies? The answer is simple. Poppies only flower in uprooted soil. Their seeds can lie in the ground for years and years, and only when someone roots up the ground they will sprout. Soldiers' folklore had it that these poppies were vivid red from having been nurtured in the ground, drenched with the blood of their comrades. It was written by a surgeon attached to the 1st Field Artillery Brigade, Major John McCrae, a Canadian, who had spent 17 days treating injured and dying men, Canadians, British, Indians, French, and Germans, in the Ypres battle in France. One death particularly affected McCrae. A young friend and former student, Lieutenant Alex Helmer of Ottawa, had been killed by a shell burst on 2 May 1915. Lieutenant Helmer was buried later that day in the little cemetery outside McCrae's dressing station, and McCrae had performed the funeral ceremony himself in the absence of a chaplain. The next day, sitting on the back of an ambulance parked near the dressing station beside the shared canal, just a few hundred yards north of Ypres, McCrae vented his anguish by composing this poem. In a nearby cemetery, McCrae could see wild poppies that sprang up in the ditches in that part of Europe, and he spent 20 minutes of precious rest time scribbling lines of verse into a notebook. Quote, his face was very tired but calm as we wrote, unquote, a witness recalled. He looked around from time to time, his eyes straying to Helmer's grave. The poem was an exact description of the scene in front of us both. He used the word blow in that line because the poppies actually were being blown that morning by a gentle east wind. Dissatisfied with it, McCrae tossed the poem away, but a fellow officer retrieved it and sent it to newspapers in England. Soon people decided to wear red poppy as a way of keeping faith, as McCrae had urged in his poem. Throughout the Allied nations, organizations began to sell poppies to raise money for widows, orphans, and needy veterans and their families. And that's the purpose. So if you see these gentlemen selling poppies the next time you're out, going into a store or whatever, think about it, and think about what they did to save our generation from freedom and tyranny. And here's a photograph from World War II. We see the tankers. This is in Italy, and they just happen to be taking a rest, and it's in a field full of these poppies. Okay, I'm going to pause now, and I would like you to come on up and meet our veterans. Just watch. If you could have a seat, and we're going to start our show. I'm going to reintroduce myself and the gentleman at the table. And gentlemen, when I introduce you, you just give a wave of the hand. Because we're broadcasting live over the internet on the World Wide Web. There's people all over the country right now who are actually watching this unfold in real time. And we're broadcasting from Hudson Falls High School. My name is Mr. Matthew Rosell. I teach history here. I've been teaching here for about 15 years. And about 15 years ago, I actually began to send home surveys with my 10th grade students, because that's when we usually study the Second World War. And I wanted them just to get an idea of how many of them had grandparents, or parents even then, who had fought in World War II. And were still alive and could write something on this survey to send back, just to kind of explain to that student, or the students in general, what it was like to grow up in a world that was torn by war 50, 60 years ago. Well, as time went on, and less of these surveys would come back in because the veterans were passing, it became clear to me that it would be a good idea to try and record the stories before they were basically gone for good, so that we, meaning my generation and your generation, the students, would never forget the things that our grandparents' generation went through. So to do it, we created this website. It's called the Hudson Falls High School World War II Living History Project. And if you scroll down a little bit, it gives you a little bit of background about it. As I said, we're broadcasting live today, and the theme is, scroll down a little bit, the Pacific Campaign, the war, the island hopping to defeat the Japanese, who were a formidable foe, a savage enemy in the Pacific Theater of War. On the left-hand margin, if you go to this website, if you're watching on the internet, you're already here, obviously, but for anybody who's in the room right now listening, you can access the website, and on the sidebar, you can click on the interviews page and scroll down a bit. You can scroll down and you'll actually see the stories that have been transcribed. They're videotape interviews that I have done or my students have done. Stop. And I got a quote right here from a U.S. Marine who's going to speak today. His name is Dan Lawler. He He says, I can remember the small children would come up to us carefully and just stand there. They didn't put their hands out for food. We offered them food, but they would refuse to eat it until we ate some first. We found out later that the Japanese had told them that the Americans would kill them if they asked for anything. And of course, that was Dan Lawler. Give a wave there, Dan. We got Dan's story here, and if you click on the hyperlink for Dan Lawler, I'm not sure Dan even knows this yet, but his whole story that he wrote out for us was retyped by one of my students, and scroll down, and here it is. So it's there for Dan, it's for Dan's grandparents, and it's for every American to read. And I think Ryan Foley, raise your hand, Ryan, he was the transcriber. So we made a little bridge there across the generations. Back it up. And we got a conversation down here with a man by the name of James Butterfield. And the quote says, we were waiting for the fires, excuse me, wrong quote. They came over to talk to you and dropped a grenade in your lap, you know. They'd want to bum a cigarette and their job was to get rid of us. And this is from James Butterfield. And James is sitting at the table here today. He's right on the corner. And he's talking about Okinawa in 1945, terrible battle. James lost his eyesight there 57 years ago at that battle. And he might be sharing some things with us today too. Okay, back button. Yeah, some of the artifacts. Click. If we click down here, this gentleman's in the room today too. His name's Art Laporte. Give a wave, Art. Art's over there at the table. He's been in before. All these guys have been in here before. One of the things that Art brought in, did you bring it today, your diary?
No, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's okay, because we got it right here. This is Art's diary that he kept on Iwo Jima. Art was a machine gunner, and one of the things a Marine, or any machine gunner for that matter, wanted to do was make sure he knew how his weapon operated, so that he could change it in the dark, because if he didn't know how to clean it and keep it running, he was a dead man. And if you click on that center inside, here's a page from Art's diary, which he labels all the parts, stripped down, and because he had to know it. He had to know how to do it in his sleep. Back it up. Back again. Scroll down. All right, scroll back up. Hit the back button. All right, so that's a little bit about what our website's all about. And Jessica's going to bring up one of our PowerPoints now. Yep. Okay. Our theme today is the Pacific Campaign, and these 5 gentlemen here are some of the combat Marines who survived some of the most horrific fighting in the entire war. And we can see a painting that was done by a very famous painter. His name was Tom Lee, of the U.S. Marines. And we can also see a photograph that was taken after the battle at Okinawa. It shows a lonely Marine near the grave of one of his friends. And we had the survivors with us here today, so I'm going to tell you about how they got to a place called Peleliu. In November 1943, the U.S. Marines began the costly assault on the Gilbert Islands at Macon and Tarawa. 2 miles long and 900 yards wide, Betio Island airstrip was the main target. This is the airstrip. Doesn't look very big, does it? Here's the information. 10 tons of high explosives per acre were landed that morning by Navy guns before the storming of the island began by these guys, the Marines. And this was after heavy bombing by B-24 Liberator bomber planes. Here's a photograph taken under fire, the Marines advancing under fire. Click. Unfortunately, the enemy was so well dug in and fortified that artillery fire had little effect, and the ground troops took heavy losses. On November 24, 17 Japanese survivors, 17, surrendered. 4,700 of the enemy were killed, and 1,027 Marines and 29 naval officers lost their lives for that little piece of real estate. A painful lesson was learned regarding the Japanese fortifications and their willingness to fight to the death. Now, if you look at this map, this is what we're talking about, this island campaign. The objective, of course, was to get close enough to Japan to be able to bomb it, and of course, take it. And the time period we're talking about is over here in the Marshall Islands, etc. We heard from Bob Addison last period. They were the first combat Marines to actually engage the Japanese in the war at Guadalcanal, and after several months of savage fighting, managed to secure that air base. And now we're pushing further on. In January 1944, U.S. landings in the Admiralty and Marshall Islands began. Over here. In June, the Mariana Islands were struck as they contained key air bases of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. We're getting closer. 1,300 miles from Tokyo. They would be within range of the new B-29 bombers headed for targets in Japan. Photograph of some of these bombers. The Enola Gay was one of these bombers. Do you know what the Enola Gay did? It would drop the atomic bomb, but that was not going to be possible unless these islands were taken. 20,000 Marines, followed by reserves and Marine battalions and an Army division, took 3 weeks to secure Saipan at a cost of 16,525 American killed and wounded. 29,000 Japanese defenders were killed, with almost no Japanese prisoners taken. To compound the horror, hundreds of civilians committed suicide by wading into the sea or jumping off cliffs, fearful of U.S. soldiers in captivity, from what they've been told by the Japanese. At Guam, 100 miles to the south, the assault began on the 21st of July, 44. Although the island was officially under control after 5 days, the Japanese refused to recognize the inevitable, and it would be another 2 weeks before it was declared secure. They wouldn't surrender. Some small bands of Japanese held out in the hills for years after the battle, not even realizing that the war had ended. On September 15, 1944, the 1st Marine Division, these guys are here today, and the Army troops began the attack on Peleliu after 3 days of heavy bombardment by Navy ships. This is another island that had to be taken. Peleliu hosted a major Japanese airfield that was deemed a major threat to any United States advance to liberate the Philippines. The island was heavily defended by Imperial troops, dug into a network of pillboxes and 500 coral caverns and caves. The Japanese would now remain hidden, and when overrun, pop up and shoot Americans from the rear. The conquest of this island and airstrip took over a month and killed 1,529 Americans. Japanese dead numbered over 10,000. And with us today, Dan Lawler and James Butterfield, they were there. And this is them. So I'm going to let Dan and James say a few words, if they will, about this.
The picture you got on there right now was by Lee. This picture was in Life magazine in 1944, and I have it right here. And he's also had 4 or 5 different other pictures on him. The temperature on the island ran about 150 to 135 all while, night and day. We were supposed to take the island in 3 days and have the airfield the first night. I don't know how many. It took them 2 or 3 months to take the island. I went in the first assault wave on the Amtrak tracks, and we got as far as the airfield, and we held up there. The next day we were going across the airfield, and I got about halfway across, and I believe it was an artillery piece hit behind me. I don't remember anything, but when I woke up, I was laid face down, and I had 3 broken fingers on one hand. I got some shrapnel in the back, and I got some up on the top of my head. So they took me back off the island. You want something, Jimmy?
Talking about Peleliu, Jim.
Yeah, right from here, right, okay?
Yeah.
I was with George Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Regiment. On September the 15th, we hit Peleliu. Peleliu was one of the bloodiest battles that the United States Marine Corps ever fought. My CO was Chesty Puller, 5 Navy crosses, and he was a Marine's Marine. He would go anywhere and do anything he asked. The first thing we were to take the airport, secure it, and defend it. We did that the first day. we lost over 500 men on the beach. After taking the airport, we were to take the ridges because they overlooked the airport. And any planes coming in would have got all shot up. We took Hill 210 and it took us 3 days. We started out with over 900 men and winded up with a little more than 400. Later on in the week, well, let me put it this way. The first 200 hours on Peleliu, my regiment lost 1,600 people. Not all killed, wounded, and dead. We no longer could function as a regiment because we didn't have enough people. So the 7th came in and gave us a hand in the 5th. I was up there 75 days and lost a lot of friends. And I didn't know that Danny and Jack got wounded until 4 months later, before I caught up with them again. Any questions on Peleliu?
Yeah, who's Jack?
Jack Murray.
Jack Murray was a Hudson Falls graduate.
He came from Hudson Falls. He played football. I played football against him, and we ran into each other at Camp Lejeune. I ran into Danny at Camp Lejeune.
So you all went into the Marine Corps together, basically, right?
Yeah.
Harold Chapman?
He got killed at, he come from South Glens Falls, and then I ran into him in Lejeune. So Glens Falls was well represented over there. But he got killed in May the 5th, up to Okinawa. The whole 4 of us all got wounded, but Chappie got killed, and that was a sad day. And then 2 weeks later, I got hit. So Danny is the only one that made it through.
Danny Lawler, who's sitting here today.
Yeah. But I think this foxhole was deeper. That's a joke.
Must have been, huh?
The airstrip. Tell me
Huh?
about the airstrip when the planes took off. They had their shortest runway.
I can't hear you all.
Tell them about the airstrip. You hear that?
I did, didn't I?
Yeah, but tell them about the planes. They would take off and then they hit Bloody Nose Ridge.
That's what I said. I said that, didn't I?
No, you told them it was it.
We took the airstrip.
Never mind. Never mind.
Bloody Nose Ridge, what happened there?
Yeah, we had a Bloody Nose Ridge too. As I said, that's where we went up with the 900 people and came back with only 400.
And the Japanese would shoot
Oh yeah,
at American.
right.
And that's where your colonel met you.
That's where my colonel. Yeah, he's a nice guy. But we had a good time up there.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Like Danny said, it was hot, and that took a lot of our people too. When it was 120, and you couldn't throw nothing away. You had to keep your dungaree jackets and stuff on, because you never knew what the hell was going to happen to you. And well, let me back up. The only thing we threw away up there was when we hit the beach, we all had gas masks, and I don't know why, but they went first, you know. Then the BR guys would get rid of their tripods because they were too heavy.
The Browning automatic
Yeah,
machine gun.
right. And so it was, those guys, I still can't get over the guts these guys had that you served with. If they had the same kind of accident here, they'd be in the hospital. Up there, they just kept on going. And we paid dearly for every foot we took. But you look at the flag, you look at this country, you had to do it.
How old were you?
About 90% of the guys were 19 and under.
Raise your hand if you're,
Beg pardon?
I'm talking to the students now.
Oh.
Raise your hand if you're 17 or 18 in this room. Okay. Well, imagine what you might have been asked to do about 60 years ago.
We all enlisted when we were 17. Danny, Walt, Chappie, myself. I had a hard time getting my mother to sign the papers. Because I was afraid it was going to be over before I got over there.
So you wanted to fight.
Yeah. But the Marine Corps was it. Chose the best.
No, that's obvious. You're here today to tell us, so. Gonna let Danny he wants to say something else.
When I was your age, I was cross-eyed. I went down to join the Marine Corps, and they turned me down. And I went to the Navy, and they turned me down. I went to the Army, and they said, when you get here, you're going to be 4F. I came home, and Mother said, why don't you have the operation on your eye? So I did it. And I did have a 4F card. After I got my operation, I went through the Navy, and that's how I got in the Marine Corps. I wanted the Marine Corps really bad. I had a brother that was in the Marine Corps. He was after parasite. He came home with a bad heart, and he died at 24 years old when I was on Okinawa. When we went in there, we had about a half a gallon of water, and at noontime, everybody was out of water. That's how bad it was. That's what the heat did to us in there.
And didn't they carry water in?
They carried water in 40. They filled up these 45-gallon drums, and they had gasoline in before them. So when we start drinking it, we all got sick.
So you guys are fighting in 120-degree weather,
Yeah,
thrown up.
yeah. That was part of it. That goes with it. Lee in here remarked that the Peleliu was one of the 4 bloodiest battles in history of the Marine Corps. It's written right here. It was Saipan, Iwo Jima, Tarawa, and Peleliu.
One of the most costly.
Costly, yes. Getting back to this, what I was trying to say, that the planes were taken off from the island. When the planes took off from the island to bomb, the ridge that he was talking about was right at the other end of their airfield. So it was the shortest bombing they ever did. They just took off and just dropped and came right back.
Yeah, if you look here at the map,
Yes.
this is what he's talking about. Here's the airfield.
Yeah.
And right at the end of the airstrip is where the Japanese were, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So Bloody Nose Ridge, this is the hills that had to be shaken.
You didn't overlook this.
Drop down, Bob. You don't see the airport? Can you come to me a little bit this way? Just come over this way. Right there. That down. Right in there is where we hit the beach. That's where we hit. We went up onto the airfield. The 1st Marine Division had 1,502 killed and 5,275 wounded. That was one of those. The 8th Infantry Division was there. They lost 208 killed, 1,855. The Navy lost 158 killed and 505 killed.
And how big was this place?
The island was 4 miles long, 2 miles wide.
4 miles long, 2 miles wide. Okay.
I think we killed 10,000 Japs in there.
10,000 Japanese.
Somebody figured it up, but I don't think it all been buried in there. There was enough room.
Jeez.
Is there any questions anybody like to?
Yeah, does anybody have a question I can relay it to them?
It was a good place to go if you wanted to lose weight.
Yeah, we all did that.
Jim says it was a good place to go if you wanted to lose weight.
Well, I tell you, my uniform is sitting up here in the front, and if I put it on now, it'll go here. There's no way I could get into it now.
Jeez. Sarah's got a question. Go ahead.
What are your feelings about the Japanese now?
Oh, let me relay through the microphone so people in our audience can see. Sarah wants to know how you feel about the Japanese today.
The American Japs, they were Japan, but I can't. It's tough.
You asking me?
Oh, we'll get to you. You wait your turn.
Yeah. You throw me in, I'll throw you in. As I said before, it's kind of a particular situation. Up in this college, we were sitting up there. We had a meeting, and there was an American Japanese there, and he stood next to me, and I just froze. I came out. I couldn't stay there. But if he wasn't in uniform, it would have made a difference. There's no really. It's got a lot better, but it's real tough to see it. Wait a minute, Jimmy, you've got something to say.
Here, Jim. Go ahead. You can talk now if you want.
Oh, I just want to know if you were asking me what I think of them.
Yeah, we're asking.
I think they do it again. This is what I think. I don't like them.
Well, you have a definite reason not to like them, I would think.
I guess so.
They took some of your life away.
Big pardon?
They took some of your life away.
Well, but it could have been worse.
And here comes coming down.
I got one more thing to say. I left high school when I went into the Marine Corps. And I came back, and I'll tell you, don't leave high school, because I went back to high school. When I graduated, I was 24 years old, so don't ever leave high school. Without it, you're going nowhere.
Along that line about what do you think of the Japanese now? Well, my brother was in the Army engineers. We ran into each other over there in New Caledonia. And he stayed in after the war. He was in occupied Japan, and he married a Japanese girl. And his biggest concern was me, you know. And but we accepted her. My mother accepted her, and 2 beautiful kids, and they still live down in Long Island with my brother and his Japanese wife. They're both gone now, but we learned to live with them and get to know them as people, individuals.
Art?
I ran into a Jap. I call them Japs. Call them something else, but I won't say it here. He had been on Ewell like I was. He was fighting me on Ewell. And the war was over. We were both fighters. He was fighting for Japan. I was fighting for the United States. And the war was over. We both did our best, and we had a good talk, and there was no hard feelings.
Well, I think that's the way, one way to look at it too, is unfortunately they had a job to do as well, and here's well.
Getting back to that theme, they had reunions on Ewell, 40th and 50th, and the Japanese sent those people that they could return there, and they were all, mostly all, not original men that were there, but their sons and their parents, different things like that. And they put a monument up there to commemorate this. They had Marines there from the regulars that were in on the island. They paid for the guys to get over there. They got permission from the Japanese.
The U.S. Marine.
Yes, and they were hugging and kissing each other on the cheek and different things because the war was over. They'd done their duty, and they wanted to go on with this world to become a peaceful place, which it isn't today. And I think
Never apologized.
not
They never
officially,
Never.
no,
Never.
never apologized that way.
I
I'm
go-
talking about an individual
I
apologize.
go to Hawaii every year. I go to September, October. And I see,
All right, here's Jim again.
and I see a lot of Japanese over there. And of course, I wear my shirt that says U.S. Marine. And when you walk down the street, they step aside for you. I said, I love that. And my wife is a very lovable person. And very seldom says anything only to me. But we're on up, let's see, the Honolulu Star. And it goes up and down the coast. And it runs you through Pearl Harbor Day. From the early morning until mid-afternoon. And we went out and she took some pictures and she got back and this fellow was sitting at the table. And Mary says, excuse me, she says, this is our table. And he just shook his head and put up 4 fingers. And he looked down, there's 4 hats there. Mary says, well, she says, I'm sorry, but this is our table. I said, what's the problem? He said, he's got our seats. I said, what do we want to do about it? She said, I want my table. I says, is the windows open? She said, yes. I says, well, let's throw them over the side. So this guy comes up behind me and he says, I was in the Marine Corps. And he says, but I didn't see much combat. I said, stick around, I think you're going to see World War III. But we just walked away from it. But I never saw my wife get upset like that before, you know. I thought it was pretty good myself.
Yeah, tough to deal with, I guess. All right, now I think, let's see. Oh. Do we have, Sarah, thank you very much. That was a good question, obviously. Are there any more questions right now before I ask people if they want to come up and meet our badge? Don't be bashful, Danny says. Go ahead, Donald.
If Japanese people walked up to you and wanted to shake your hand and ask you out for dinner, would you take the offer, or would you say, well, you know, what did you do to us to, you know, would you?
If he's from Japan, I'd say no. If he's from America, I'd shake his hand.
What about James over here?
I believe it.
Well, I think we got that answer. Nicole?
Did you
in World War II, we put Japanese Americans in camps. Did you agree with that?
The internment camps, Nicole's asking about the Japanese Americans who were interned in California.
Well,
That was a big mistake.
I think it was a mistake because they were Americans. I mean, after all, they are Americans, you know. We are Americans, you know, we're all mixed breed anyway, so there's none of us really truly American. Get away.
Hey, here's Wall.
They took the Japanese because they were Japanese and we went to war and the fervor was to keep them confined. They never paid them back. They've never paid them back for their properties. They just took them and put them in concentration camps. They didn't treat them like the Germans did, but they were in concentration camps. They were Nazi Americans and they were very offended by this. If they'd done this to the Japanese, how come they didn't put me in a concentration camp? My mother and father came as immigrants from Germany, so I'm first generation here. So how come the Germans and the Italians didn't get put in?
And weren't these Nisi units really effective in Italy and elsewhere?
The 442nd Regiment was the most decorated of the Army units in what part? Purple Heart Division. They fought courageously in Italy for our country. And they were all Japanese, but they were Japanese Nisi-like. And they went against their country.
They were the children of the Japanese,
Yeah.
first generation immigrants.
Well, there are hard feelings, there's no doubt about it. Because I
Jim?
go to Pearl Harbor and I go to the Punch Bowl, that's the cemetery. And a lot of the Japanese that were killed in Europe and stuff are buried there. And you used to be able to, the tours used to come in, you get off the bus, you go walk around. Ernie Powell and those guys are buried there. And take a nice look. It's Hawaiian 5-0. The statue was always on the Hawaiian 5-0 when you know, on the TV program. But it got that people were coming in, and then they were destroying the Japanese graves. So now you cannot go in on the you can go in on the tour, but you're not allowed to get off the bus. But yet, if you take a cab or a city bus up there, you can go in and walk around. But they have to watch it pretty good. So there's a lot of hard feelings. But the Hawaiian people that took the blunt of this, they had to depend on these Japanese people to come in and keep the country going. All their tours they bring in, you know?
Today.
And it comes down to one
Tourists.
thing, money.
Yeah.
You gotta have it. You gotta have it to get along.
Yeah.
So you just swallow it and go along with it.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Bob?
On the 50th anniversary of Guadalcanal, some of the fellows were out there, and there were Japanese there. And what these people were there for was to render some last rites or something, you know. And they asked our fellows if they could tell them where their Japanese were buried. And our fellows were just dumbfounded. We said, no, you just better bless the whole island. And because they were just, we just had to bury them where they were, period. You know, we couldn't mark them or anything. So and we had that experience there too.
Okay, I think I'm going to pause here. After Art, did you want to say something?
Our people have gone back to Iwo Jima year after year, but the last, about 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was, the Japanese started showing an attitude, so I don't think our people are going to be going back to Iwo as welcome people anymore.
Well, we're going to talk more about that in our next segment. We have about 5 minutes now. I'd like to give these vets a hand, please. I guess it's time. All right.
Fucking crazy.
Brian, you're my light man whether you like it or not. So those first 2 switches, turn them off. And watch me because I'm going to tell you to turn them on, okay? At the right time. Okay, now turn them on. Good job. We're just testing.
It goes on the transcript.
Okay.
Who said girls are fucking crazy? Me, Ryan Foley.
Okay, are we ready? All right. Okay. Good afternoon. If you're just joining us, this is Matthew Roselle. We're broadcasting live over the World Wide Web. This is the World War II Living History Project. I'm a history teacher at Hudson Falls High School in Hudson Falls, New York. For those of you who are watching on the internet, you might be in a different state or a different country. We're unfolding in real time, and we are here today because it's Memorial Day weekend, We have 5 combat Marines who fought the Japanese in the Pacific during World War II. Who are here to share with us some of their stories. So I'd like to introduce them before we begin. And if you'd just give a wave of the hand, gentlemen. On my left, I have Mr. Robert Addison. And Bob was one of the original Edson's Raiders. I have Mr. Art Laporte, 17-year-old Marine who was wounded at Iwo Jima, and we'll talk about that shortly. I have Mr. Daniel Lawler, another combat Marine, Mr. Walthammer, and James Butterfield, who's here with us today. And James was wounded 57 years ago at the Battle of Okinawa, and we'll talk about that today. James can't see today because of that wound. He couldn't see. Well, he's been blind for 57 years, so imagine having to deal with that. Imagine having to tell your mother about that, and I think he'll talk to us a little bit about that as our program commences. Okay, Brian, lights, 2 of them. Okay, now if you focus on the screen, I'd like to show you what the Living History Project is all about. I have several students here today who are very involved in this project, and the goal of it is basically to bring what's been titled the greatest generation together with the latest generation, so to speak. And our goal is to videotape these interviews and set up these webcasts, and then have our students go back and talk to the vets and transcribe these audio interviews into something that can be read and preserved for these gentlemen's families, grandchildren, but also for all Americans, because World War II was such a catastrophic event, and these gentlemen are leaving us at the rate of 1,500 a day. That's 45,000 a month, and it's going to be, within my teaching career, they're going to be awful hard to find. So we're doing it now, and this website is dedicated to them and to those who didn't come back from the war. Scroll down a little bit, just to show a few things to the people who haven't seen this before. For the past 15 years, I've been canvassing my students, and I've found that over time I get less and less response when I send surveys home, because these grandparents who served in World War II are